Hey everybody, Ginzburg here, digital marketing expert. Very excited. Chris Cunningham is here and he's our guest today, and he's a VC founder, and I'm really excited to hear his story because I think it's kind of a unique, interesting story, a bit of a disruptor in the VC space. So how's it going, Chris?
Awesome, Jane. Nice to be with you today.
Yeah, very nice to have you. So, I've read your written interview that we did on Authority Magazine, and I'm curious to hear more about what's the traditional VC space and what does that look like, and what you're doing to disrupt that space.
Sure. Yeah. So, my vantage has been I've been a builder entrepreneur for the last 20 years in a number of different companies, and what once I kind of got a little bit later in my career, I kind of had this aha moment, which was, wow, I made so many mistakes as a founder and a CEO. And I know I wasn't the only one that made these same mistakes, whether it came from fundraising or when to hire or building culture in your business or how to deal with your board or how to pivot or recap. The list goes on and on. It kind of dawned on me that the venture model, quite frankly, Gene, is broken. And what I mean by that is the gap between institutional capital and founders is too wide. The premise that a quarterly board meeting solves all problems and all the important topics get laid on the table over 3 hours, I think is BS. So what I realized where there was an opportunity was, how do I sit in the trenches in between venture and with founders and help support them in their journey. Everything from fundraising and commercial, lend experience to the table to help mitigate how many mistakes that founder will find. So I started doing that independently 4 years ago through C2 Ventures. And obviously we can get into it a little bit more, and that's grown significantly over the last couple of years, and really believe that operator venture money, smart money, is the wave of the future.
Okay. So what are traditional VCs doing now? Are they not advising as much as what you think should be the best strategy for them?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think most, well, it depends. A lot of venture, listen, traditional venture, big checks have its place. By no way am I saying that the venture industry overall isn't working, because that would be, I guess, that'd be a bit crazy. But that's for mid and later stage, Gene. What I'm really talking about is, and I should have made that point earlier, I'm talking about 0 to 3 years old. I'm talking about infancy to crawling to, your first words, early days. I think, and I've seen, and I've had founders tell me that when a startup gets 18 months or 2 years of runway, they can't afford to make that many mistakes because things will go off a cliff. Mm-hmm. And the reality of it is the venture model today it doesn't scale if you're spending time with your founders. So the short answer to your question is no, venture does not advise their companies. They hope to pick the superstar founder that he or she will navigate to the Holy Land. And sometimes that happens. I actually would beg to say that 80% of startups fail is kind of the industry average. I think that's unacceptable. I think it's repairable by putting operators and those with lots of experience in a trusted position with founders and CEOs to make sure that it's not that they're going to avoid every iceberg, but they can certainly avoid more than being independent. On top of that, whether it's fundraising or getting their MVP out or their first check, they're going to have a much easier approach and a quicker path if they have those that can fast track them there versus relying on their own network.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think there's a lot of upside here, right? If 80% of startups fail, there's a lot of opportunity to make them not fail, right? I mean, that's a pretty large percentage, right?
Correct.
So seems like there is many things that we can do to flip that, right? From going to 80-20 to the opposite, right? Where 80% or higher number of startups are actually are actually succeeding. So, so share what is your philosophy on, do you do the advising? Do you have a team of people who are helping you and these founders of startups advise on specific topics?
Yeah, well, one more point before I answer that question, I think it's important to note that whether venture wants to admit it, the alignment between what a founder wants and a venture wants, everything starts off as a bed of roses, and that's kind of your dating before you get married. But the reality of it is ventures want return, and they have different interests to support their LPs and shareholders that founders, I think, are generally naive about. So that's why, what I consider kind of this middle layer of somebody that and a team that can see sort of different value that supports more the founder than what the venture wants. I wanted to make sure I made that point, Gene. To your question, this was more about kind of the thesis.
Yeah. So in terms of your philosophy, like, do you do the advising yourself? Do you have a team of experts on specific topics that are advising these companies?
So basically, C2 Ventures is small, it's boutique, but that's evolving, and I'll speak to that. I write a check and I take advisory shares, and that's table stakes. That's non-negotiable, and with that, you get me and my network, and what I can bring to the table. My thesis really falls along, the founder. That represents a huge chunk of how I feel the compatibility is, and generally, I feel like I have a pretty good instinct with that individual, whether it's a he or she. Do I understand the space? Can I support it? God forbid if that founder got hit by a bus, which sounds tragic and terrible, but could I step in and run the company? And more importantly, can my network support the business? So I think about those pieces as it relates to investing. If somebody brought me an awesome drone company, I don't even if I believe there's a good return for my model, I would probably pass, given the fact that it wouldn't be crystal clear if I was able to support that business through my network, which sits on both publishers, brands, agencies, and kind of the venture community. So that's kind of how I think about it. And as I move forward, I'm raising a small fund, taking on LPs to help write bigger checks, and also, Gene, bringing on more people that believe in this thesis, that have domain expertise from product, e-commerce, engineering, commercial. So that way I can scale myself, if you will, moving forward. So that's kind of, a little bit about how I've been operating the last 4 years, which got me here, and which today we have about a 7x return. Venture is about 2.5. Portfolio looks strong overall. So there's a good narrative there, I believe, going into raising a fund shortly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this totally makes sense. It seems that startups need support. Probably they would go to their VC as the first line of defense, right? And having that support, whether it's engineering, whether it's HR or finance or marketing, of course, this is all required for growth and for growth of the company overall. So this totally makes sense. And of course, you can't do it all yourself. So I'm sure that you probably want to bring in some experts who are specific experts in a specific field, so that's subject matter experts, if you will. So this absolutely makes sense. And I haven't really heard that much about experts coming into VCs, because I don't know. I mean, I just feel like it's not a thing that I'm hearing about, but it totally makes sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is a growing trend that is beginning to happen, and there's some notable venture, whether it's precursor ventures and Charles Hudson or Union Square. There's been some subtle tweets and posts out there that there's definitely kind of an inflection point, and founders really need the model is ripe for disruption for early stage, and for my thesis, Gene, it's really about 0 to 3. You can be a first or second time founder, but if you're able to raise a Series B or a big A, I'm not your guy anymore. That means you've outgrown me, and I wish you best of luck. And now you can afford a chief revenue officer and, pay he or she a $250,000 a year. But all up into that, those very critical sort of stages when you're very fragile and you're somewhat not meant to succeed, that's the area that I like to play in. So we're very focused both on early, pre-seed, seed, the kinds of companies we invest in, and also, most importantly that I didn't mention, working with founders that are willing to listen. Because believe me, I've had a couple go off a cliff as well, unfortunately, and those were chosen poorly by myself in retro, and those were ones that had a bit of a chip on their shoulder. They weren't humble. Maybe the press told them how great they were, and they kind of missed the basic blocking and tackling. So, but with everything you learn with your experience.
Absolutely. So you mentioned, of course, mistakes as why you are disrupting this this particular industry. Founders making mistakes. So what are some top mistakes that founders have made that you are seeing happening in the industry?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's
I'm sure there's a lot, but let's just talk about a few that you have had experience with and you can speak to.
I'll rattle off, a handful. I mean, I think, number one, not having a technical co-founder, major no-no in today's world of innovation and how quickly things are moving. I mean, worst case, if you have a good technical team, you could you could have an acqui-hire. So, a couple BD people, no, thank you. Strong tech chops, critical. Two, founders that are very open to giving their equity out from their cap table. Too often founders get selfish and they believe that, they start thinking about being a millionaire rather than thinking about building a supporting cast around them to help them kind of chase their dream. Another sort of classic mistake. I mentioned tech, but having a healthy blend between commercial and technology. I've seen some companies not work because they didn't have technology, but others that were too geeky and didn't know how to sell. So I think there's a very strong balance in that. I think companies that come in and that don't have an MVP, proof of concept, or haven't shown that they've bled a little bit are also a turnoff. I think you have to, burn the midnight oil, burn through your savings account, beg, borrowed, stole from your parents. I don't really care, but show me that you're not just coming in with a PowerPoint and that you've done some things on your own that have showed risk. Because
you have skin in the game.
Yeah, if I'm giving you if you, not just me, if an investor is writing a check, show that you're also willing to put yourself out there. So these are some of the, like we said, Gene, there are a lot of sort of classic pitfalls. I mean, another one would just be simply not really understanding the importance of IP and building a moat as relates to kind of a competitive opportunity. But mostly at this stage, it's about the founding team. It's about team again. It's about the trust between that team. It's about communication. And let me just kind of leave you one more. And again, it is a long list. We could talk through, but communication is such a critical piece, whether it's internally or external with your investors. The best founders write an update every month, for example, with how things are going, bad or good. It comes out day one. It's the same format, and and that builds trust. So these are some of the things that, whether it's in the fundraising mode or post fundraising, I've seen in regards to both the good, bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with communication. I mean, communication is key for anything, whether it's communicating with your advisors, with your VCs, with your customers, with your prospects. I mean, it's such a key point that I think a lot of founders or companies miss the boat on. And I think there's so much opportunity there. It's something that we focus on quite a bit with our clients as well. So I can speak a little bit to that myself.
Yeah.
Maybe the last piece would be, what are some pieces of advice, maybe 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would give to a startup founder, whether it's, pitching, whether it's growing, whether it's, growth hacking, whatever it might be. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the hardest things that you'll do in your career outside of probably raising a family. Those are potentially interchangeably in regards to difficulty level. So, I tell founders, don't do this unless you're willing to basically run through a burning building and kind of risk it all. That you don't care about what others think, and that you're willing to sort of will it to happen. And what I mean by that is very few companies on day one are the companies that, potentially go on to exit, right? If that's the goal. That means the ability to kind of evolve your business and your narrative and be creative is kind of to be expected. So if you're kind of dead set on one angle or one perspective and you think that's the holy grail, that you're probably going to be mistaken. You need to be somewhat open-minded. But number one is don't do it. Don't start a company as a potential founder unless you've really thought through the sacrifice and the risk that's tied to it. Because anyone around you, whether it's employees or investors, if they don't feel that level of commitment is there, you're already starting off on the wrong foot as relates to kind of trust with those around you. So I think that would be it.
Oh, that's a really sound advice, because of course we don't want to start something that we can't finish, and there's so many companies out there that are doing that, and they, everybody needs to be on their A game, of course, when it comes to starting a company, because it is, I think we have this kind of notion in the media that it's like, oh, it's so easy being an entrepreneur, being a startup founder, millions of dollars, everything's like super easy, but actually in the reality of things, it is much harder than we expect it to be, and than we actually think. I think the media needs to kind of change their attitude on how startup founders or just founders of companies present themselves, because it is a lot of work.
That's exactly right. And the more honest we are about that, the better. Absolutely.
Yeah, because it might deter some people from starting a company, because it is a lot of work, and it's nights and weekends. It's not being able to go out with your friends. It's spending all this time. It's, taking care of the small things, before you can build out a team. So there is a lot of things that need to get done before you can really be a successful company. So, and we've experienced all of this ourselves, of course.
Yep, that's exactly right. And I would just kind of echo that again, the importance of understanding these things. But yeah, I mean, Gene, my last comment is, and part of C2 Ventures and why I'm so passionate about what we're doing and raising a fund is, even if you don't have this advice, and even if you listen to this advice or you miss this advice or other piece of advice and you made a mistake, with an operator that had been there and done that, you still have a higher probability of mitigating risk, right? And for those that have kids out there, I have 2 boys. It's no different than teaching them table manners, tying their sneakers, or going to the bathroom. I mean, if you don't teach your kids, then how do they learn? It's the same. These are principal things here that unless you've been there, you don't know. But if you make a mistake on the fly and you've had 18 months only of capital and you've just wasted 4 of them, now you're down to 14 months. So you get the idea. You really don't have that much wiggle room. And that's why bringing people on that have already been there makes a ton of sense.
Oh, I cannot agree more. I think that VCs need to use this kind of philosophy as well more, because there's just so many subject matter experts out there that could help and not make those mistakes, not have founders make those mistakes. So absolutely agree with that. And the last question is, how can audiences get in touch with you, whether it's through your social media or through your website?
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple of different ways. Twitter is C2 Cunningham. My website blog where I put my content up is c2ventures.co, c2ventures.co. And my email's on the website. Kind of what I'm doing is on the website. That's probably the number one spot outside of Twitter.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, Chris Cunningham, C2 Ventures. I love how you're disrupting this space. I think it's absolutely necessary. And I love to hear more about your companies that you're investing in the future. And hopefully we can flip that 2080 where only 20% of companies are successful. Hopefully we can make that smaller and smaller and smaller so that more companies are more successful with your philosophy. So absolutely. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation, Gene. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks.